Time.
We do. We are live. Well, hello, everybody. It's kind of fun to talk to you in the middle of the day. Usually it's after a long day and it's late at night and I'm sort of feeling groggy, but it's noon here, but it's 6 o'clock in Germany. So our author is visiting us from Germany, and isn't that exciting? Jan-Philipp Sendker is our author, and I have read all of his books, I can honestly say, and I've loved every single one, the new one, including The Heart Remembers. It is the end of his Burma trilogy. And I have to say, you can read it as a standalone, but why would you miss the first two? Seems crazy to give up any part of it. But, you know, if you just can't stand it because you're going to hear about it today and you just want to jump in, it's okay. The story is just beautiful in and of its own self. We met years ago when the first one in this trilogy came out, The Well-Tempered Heart, and had such an amazingly wonderful visit. My husband and I and you, and we spent some time together, and it was just delightful. So it's nice to at least be able to see your face. I do remember when you were coming then that I thought, wow, is he going to come with a translator? Because all your books are translated. And then I met you and you speak such beautiful English. I wondered why your books were translated. So it's a delight to get you in any form. And I really encourage people, a lot of you are fans and you're excited that this one's coming out. If you've missed any of these books, don't. They're just exquisite. They deal with the issues of the heart and love in different countries and places that you'll get to know in different parts of the world that you've had the chance to visit as a journalist, working for years. So you're very well traveled and have ins and insights that we don't have. So we appreciate your sharing them with us. And it's interesting how you've transitioned from journalism to writing novels. It's a very different form of writing. You've been in lockdown for a year and a half, and I know that's really difficult for someone who travels all the time, but we're glad that you could at least travel virtually with new technology. And it's just wonderful, wonderful to see you. I'm going to shut up and let you talk because nobody came to hear me. They listen to me all the time. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your kind words. And I was really, when I saw the lineup for my virtual tour, I was so happy to see that you were on it, because I think I've been to your wonderful store twice. So I had the privilege to meet you and your husband twice. We had nice dinners, and especially your whole crew in the store and your audience, your customers. It was really every trip was a very pleasant experience. And now I appreciate everybody who's joining in, because I know it's the middle of the day. It's not even a weekend, so you might have other things, probably better things to do than just sitting at noon at home or in a coffee shop and listen to me. But you do it, and I really appreciate it. And I don't take it for granted. And I would like to talk a little bit about the country where all my books are set, the trilogy, the Burma trilogy. I will talk a little bit about how the country is changing and about the new book, and then I'm happy to take your, Rona, or questions from the audience. Of course, I'm German. It's funny, when I lived in America for 8 years, and sometimes people ask me, because I have this, thanks for your compliments about my English, but I have this heavy German accent. And sometimes people said, oh, are you from Germany? I said, no. I'm just good at faking a German accent. And then we're all puzzled. So I am from Germany with a heavy German accent. And I'm here in Berlin right now, but I lived in America for 8 years. I lived in Asia for more than 4 years, as you said, as a foreign correspondent. My previous life, I was a journalist. And of course, I'm asked why a German would write 3 novels set in Burma, in Southeast Asia. And it's easy to answer and it's difficult to answer because there's no logic in it, I suppose. I was the Asia correspondent. I was based in Hong Kong, and I was very busy. It was in the mid-90s. There was a lot of things going on in China. It was opening up after Tiananmen Square. I was traveling in China a lot. I was traveling to Japan. There was a big earthquake in Kobe. There was a gas attack in the Tokyo subway. So they kept me busy. Indonesia, there was unrest. And I can't tell you why, but I had kind of an inner voice telling me, go to Burma, or Myanmar, how it's called now. And again, I can't tell you why. My Burmese friends are absolutely convinced that I must have been a Burmese in a previous life. So I just felt drawn back to my home country. I don't know. I don't believe in that, but that would be an explanation why I wanted to go to this mysterious country. Because in 1995, nobody went there. Burma had been closed for decades. There was a military coup d'etat in 1962, and then the military, they wanted to find the Burmese way to socialism, which ended in a complete disaster. They locked the country. It was a lockdown, not just for a year or two, but basically you couldn't go there for 20 years. It was a little bit like North Korea, just with better weather. And then slowly it opened up. You could get a visa for a week or so. And then in the early 90s, it opened up. You could get a visa for 4 weeks, but still nobody went. There was no infrastructure for tourism. No politicians went there, no entrepreneurs, not even NGOs. They had, I think, 200,000 visitors or something. Absolutely stunning low number. And I went. I could convince Stern to send me there to check out what's going on. And I remember I flew from Bangkok to Yangon, Bangkok, the capital of Thailand, big city, millions of people, modern city, to Yangon, a city with 7 million people. And I remember the flight was almost empty, maybe 20 passengers on the 737. There were only 2 flights a day, if I remember correctly. Now, before the coup d'etat in February, there were 20, 30 flights. In those days, there were only 2. And as I said, the plane was empty, and we approached Yangon, and it looked like as if you were flying over a small town in Florida. There were no lights. It was dark. A city of 7 million people was basically dark. And I thought, this is weird. And we touched down, and it took a while until we got through immigration, even though we were a few people. And then there were a few cars in front of the terminal, which was very small, maybe 4 times the size of your bookstore. So it was not a big terminal. It was the only terminal, the international terminal of Yangon Airport. And I got into a car, a very old, run-down Toyota, and we drove into town. And remember, I lived in Hong Kong, I'd been to Bangkok, and changed planes. And now I was in a city, there were no cars. There was no traffic. There were no lights, no shops, no neon signs. People were walking on the streets. There were lots of monks. Men were holding hands. They all were wearing long jeans. It was a very mysterious, very quiet, beautiful atmosphere. And I was so puzzled because I realized I had the privilege to have traveled maybe 80 years, 100 years in 1 hour. And that's impossible nowadays, unless maybe you visit a tribe in the Amazon or something. But Burma is not a tribe. It's a big country that's as big as Germany and France combined, bigger than Texas. 55 million people live there. So you could travel there, and you traveled decades back in time. And I was so puzzled that I asked my driver if there was a McDonald's in town. And he kept driving. And then he turned around and asked me, McDonald's, you said, is the guy maybe Scottish? I had no clue. He had no clue what I meant. And I realized this is different. As a foreign correspondent, I had been to, I don't know, 60, 70 different countries. But this was different. And still up today, there's no McDonald's in Burma. There's one Burger King at the new airport, but no McDonald's. So we drove into town. I checked in a rundown hotel, and then I started walking. And it was very mysterious. The place was full. The street was very hot. It was May, and the streets were full of people. It was market, but still it was now basically dark. And then I heard a strange sound, and then it got pitch dark. There was a blackout, and it still happens. But if it happens today, it takes a few seconds, and then the generators jump start, and you hear the same noise from all over. In those days, it was quiet and dark. But people were used to it, so they knew what to do. They started to lit candles. And they put them on desks, on tables, in tea houses, on door frames, window frames, courtyards, sidewalk. So after a few minutes, the whole neighborhood, I got the sense the whole town, city, was lit only by candlelight. It was a wonderful, wonderful, romantic, strange experience. And you only heard the human voice because there was no electricity and no cars. So people were laughing and crying and whispering and chatting, and they were singing. Again, that was very mysterious to me, because when you walk around in Germany or in America, you don't hear people singing. But there people were singing. And I followed the noise, and I ended up in tea houses, backyards, a park, river bank. And it was always the same sight. There was a young man and a young woman. Sometimes the man had a guitar. He was playing the guitar and singing. And I only later was told that it's a very Burmese tradition, at least in those days, that a young couple, they fall in love and there's not much to do. So they get together and the man sings love songs to the girl.
Nice.
Yeah, I know, Rona. I found, again, I found it incredibly romantic, but I was very happy that it is not a German tradition, because I would still be single, because I can't sing at all. So I stayed for 3 weeks, and soon I realized that life in Burma was and is very hard. It was a military dictatorship in those days, as it is again now. And it was a brutal, incompetent, corrupt dictatorship. People were living in fear. At the same time, they carried this burden with such dignity, such warmth. It was amazing. I mean, I never ever met a Burmese who pitied him or herself. They just carried on. And they were so friendly, so hospitable, so willing to share their last vegetable curry or whatever. It was an incredible, humbling experience, I have to tell you. And it really moved me very deeply. It hit something in me, I don't know what. I just wanted to go back. I remember then, it was still on my first trip, I ended up in Kalor just by chance, and I met a wonderful friend, a Burmese, and I spent a few days there, this incredible town in the Shan States, where all my 3 books are set. And what I experienced on my first trip is kind of what Julia, the main Western character of these 3 books, was experienced in The Art of Hearing Heartbeats when she was searching for her father who had disappeared, who was Burmese. She came to Kalor and she had no clue what to expect and was completely overwhelmed. And so was I. Again, I remember that first trip of this Burmese friend, he took me to a village, a Pao village. We hiked all day, arrived there in the evening, and the village head welcomed us. And it was, again, so they were sharing their vegetable curries and they made me feel so welcome. We spent the whole evening and the night there at the village head's house, a big house, and people came and I could ask questions and they asked me questions. And one question they wanted to know, it was amazing, how many sons do we have? And it was translated from the Pao into the English, and I thought they meant how many sons do I have, children. But no, they meant how many suns in the sky there are where I live. I said, oh, wow, that is a strange question. Why are you asking? Yeah, they wanted to know how long it took me by ox cart to travel from my village to their village. And I told them I was from Hong Kong. They had no clue. So I estimated it would take me maybe a year to get from Hong Kong by ox cart to their village. So they calculated if I could spend a year traveling, I probably would stay a year at their village so that the whole trip makes sense. And then it takes me a year to get back to my village. My God, they could never afford that, even though they were hardworking. So they figured I must have many sons. So I have a much richer harvest because of these many suns in the sky. I told them I only have one sky as well. They were puzzled. And then it was time to say goodbye the next morning. And that's a very Burmese tradition. When you say goodbye, you get a present. Not just bye-bye, come back again, have safe travels. I got a gift, but these people are very poor. They grow tea. That's the only thing they have. So I got a bag of tea, but not this size, not this size. It was, the size of a potato bag, a big potato bag. And I love tea. I said that. I was very surprised and humbled. I said, that's so kind of you, but I love to drink tea, but this is too much tea. That lasts for the rest of my life. Oh, the village had said, and I had the feeling the whole village was surrounding us, all the people, maybe 100, 120, all looking at us. The village had said, oh, this is not just for you. This is for the whole family, of course. Ah, okay, I said, again, that's very kind, but I live by myself. And that was translated again into their language. And after everybody had understood that I was living by myself, they looked at me. And I think never ever in my life have so many people looked at me with such a pity.
Oh.
Live by yourself? And then they got kind of tense, and only later did my Burmese friend told me why. Because in Burma, you do not live by yourself. You live with your family, your brothers. Oops, woo, my light is falling. Your brothers, your sisters, your uncle, your grandchildren, whatever. You don't live alone. That is really a punishment for a Burmese. And the only people who live alone are the mean-spirited people nobody wants to live with. So they figured I made a good impression. So what's wrong with this guy that nobody wants to live with him? I couldn't explain to them. I just said, I live by myself. My wife, she lives in New York. I live in Hong Kong. But I call her every night. Oh, it was translated and everybody was smiling. They figured if I call her every night, it must be all right then. But then the village head got suspicious and said, really every night, Jan-Philipp? Yes, really. Oh, you must have a loud voice then. And I realized he was thinking that Hong Kong is the village on top of a mountain, New York is a village on top of another mountain, and every night I go on to the edge of my village and I yell, oh no! and she's listening in New York. So yeah, I figured it's really, as you say, back in time. And I've been back every year for 25 years, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times a year. I have met wonderful friends and I have seen all these changes. And I did all my research for A Well-Tempered Heart, The Other Heartbeats, and The Heart Remembers. And of course, there were moments where I was hitting a wall, where I couldn't understand what was going on and they could not understand me. I remember I was doing research, and this whole story I'm telling you now is a big part of A Well-Tempered Heart. Since independence in 1949, there's always been fighting. There are 135 ethnic minorities in Burma. Some are very large, millions of people, the Pao, the Palong, the Shan, Karen, Kachin, and some of them want independence or autonomy. And the Burmese, they don't want that. So there's a constant fight struggling in parts of the country. And in the 80s and 90s, they used a lot of landmines, or the rebels as well. And the military, the Burmese, they didn't have enough landmine detectors and sweepers. So what did they do? They used humans. They used them, they just, surrounded whole villages, kidnapped the young men, and sent them into the rice paddies, the jungle, to clear them of the mines. They stepped on mines, the mine exploded, the guy was dead, and the mine was gone. And of course, these people were tortured. They didn't survive. And through luck and a lot of research, I was lucky to meet 3 young men who were lucky enough to survive that. And not so many people did. And they told me their story, how they were tortured and how cool it was in the jungle and how many of their comrades died stepping on mines. And I was so appalled. I got so angry. I told them, you must be so angry at these soldiers. And they all 3 said, no, it was our fault. What? I said, how can this be your fault? Oh, that was our karma. We must have done something terrible in a previous life to deserve this. And coming from the West, I exploded. I said, you are crazy. They are perpetrators. They are criminals, these soldiers. They have to be brought to justice. They have to be put in jail. This is a crime. And they couldn't understand why I got so upset, because they thought that was their karma. And there I realized, of course, we come from different cultures. And that's what, again, Julia experiences in many ways. And this is part of all my novels. I also wrote the China Trilogy. There's an American gentleman, Paul Leibowitz, who has been living in China. It's always the West meets the East, and how they contradict each other, how they what inspiration they are for each other, how we can learn from one another. So that's a big part of my books. You expose yourself to different values, to different ways of thinking, and what does it do to you? You have to question your ways of living. You have to question your ways of thinking, your values, and that's what I find fascinating in books and in real life, of course. Maybe that's one reason why I travel there so much, because very often I face huge challenges. I have to question myself. I doubt myself. It's part of the whole process of creating these books. And in the Burma trilogy is Julia, this lawyer from New York who's searching her father in the first book, searching for herself and a well-tempered heart, and in the third book I will talk about in a second. Before I come to the third book, I would like to talk a little bit about the change which took place in Burma after 2010. Basically, up until between 95 and 2010, not much changed. But then the military opened up the country. There were elections, and you had a civilian government for years. And for me, it was an amazing experience. I had this country I had known under military dictatorship. People were fearful. And then the fear was gone. It was like a huge awakening. And to see people losing their fear is one of the most amazing experiences I have had. All of a sudden, we could talk about issues. We could talk about Aung San Suu Kyi. Young people could talk about their aspirations. They had their dreams. They wanted to know. They were so thirsty, so hungry for knowledge, for the outside world, because they had been in a lockdown for so long. And now they were connected to the internet. In the old days, you couldn't even get a mobile phone. In 95, I think there were a few landline phones in Kalor, maybe a dozen. That was it. Today, Burma has more SIM cards than citizens. So all of a sudden, they were connected. They all had mobile phones, and they didn't have these old phones. They had these fancy smartphones from China. It was amazing. They knew, and they wanted to know. They started to travel. This little small middle class came about between 2010 and 20. So I spent a lot of time there, and I was deeply moved by what I saw. And my books were translated into Burmese, which was, of course, an incredible honor. The Art of Having Heartbeats, A Well-Tempered Heart, which The Art of Having Heartbeats is this very enchanting love story. The second one is much more political, and so is the third one, The Heart Remembers. And all three books were translated into Burmese. I went on reading tours, and I wrote this horrible story about the landmine sweepers and what the military did. And I remember I had one reading in Yangon, and there were hundreds of people, and one woman got up. And I knew that this reading was broadcast on radio. And one woman got up and asked me about this horrific crimes by the military, if that was true, or if I made it up. Wow, I said, now she is learning something about her recent history through my books. And I was scared at first, because some years earlier, she would have been put into jail for just asking this question. The book couldn't even come out. And now we were talking about it. And we discussed it. So it was really a big change. And and that's part of the story of the third book, The Heart Remembers. When I finished A Well-Tempered Heart, Julia had fallen in love with a Burmese monk. And there was a big decision for her, whether she would go back to New York, to her old life, or whether she would stay in Burma. And it's funny. A friend of mine, a neighbor, she just read the second book, and she wanted to know how it ends. And I said, I won't tell you, but I tell you something. I didn't know how it would end when I wrote it. When I started the last chapter of A Well-Tempered Heart, I didn't know whether Julia would stay in Yangon, in Burma, or if she would leave for New York. And eventually Julia told me. I wrote it, and she told me, I'm not going back. I stay. So she stays in Burma, and I knew I wanted to know how her whole story, her love affair with Tata, evolves. So I had to write the third book. And the third book is told from the perspective of a 12-year-old called Ko Bobo. He lives with his uncle Uba in Kalor. His father comes to visit him once, twice a year, and then his uncle disappears. And his mother lives in Yangon, but never comes. And he doesn't know why. It's a family secret. And I tell you, the Burmese don't like to talk about family secrets as little as the Americans or the Germans or wherever you go. Family secrets are called secrets for a reason, because nobody talks about it. So he lives quite happily in Kalor with his uncle. It's kind of a grandfather-grandchild relationship because Uba is 80 and Kobobo is 12. And one night he wakes up and Uba is not next to him. And he gets curious and he hears a strange sound. So he looks around and then he sees his uncle Uba sitting in front of a typewriter in the middle of the night next to a candle, typing like crazy. So Kobobo goes back to bed. Next morning, Uba is sound asleep, and Kobobo is very curious what Uba is doing at night. What is he writing? For whom? To whom? So he searches the whole hut, and eventually he finds the old typewriter and the manuscript. And he is very curious. He knows he's not supposed to read it, but in the end, he's too curious. He starts to read, and usually I don't read at my readings because I prefer you reading my book yourself instead of me reading it to you. But here I want to read you 10 lines because those are the first 10 lines Kobobo reads. And I think they sum up part of the book very well. They demanded a courage of themselves beyond the strength of their hearts. By the time they realized their mistake, it was already too late. She had no plan but a dream. He had neither one nor the other. He was afraid. And of course, fear is the natural enemy of love. A person who loves has no fear. A person who fears cannot love, only cling. Both were prisoners in their own worlds, who believed they could free one another if only they loved sufficiently. Love can accomplish many miracles, but it could not fulfill this hope, a hope as old as love itself. Yeah, he reads that. All of a sudden, Uba is in front of him, and it's very angry with him. But Kobo knows what Uba is writing, the story of his parents. So he wants to know now. And a few days, he doesn't talk to Uba until Uba gives in and starts to tell him the story of Julia and Tata. And that is set between 2007 and 2019. So exactly the time the country is opening up. And that's a part of the story. And another part of the story, again, is this cultural difference because Julia, this rich lawyer from New York, and Tata, this poor monk from Burma. And in all my previous books, Julia travels to Burma, and this time she travels with Tata to New York. And it's an important part of the book. I think I wanted to try to describe New York a little bit through the eyes of a Burmese, without getting into this crocodile Dundee trap. So I wanted to take it serious, of course, because it was a strange world to him. And he learns a lot about himself, about this different culture, about Julia. And it was amazing because I had lived in New York for 8 years, but just to write these chapters, I traveled back, stayed with a friend for a whole week. My wife first thought it's just an excuse to go back to New York. But no, I really had to do research. I tried to see New York through Tata's eyes. And right the first morning, I stepped into a big trap. I stepped out of the house of my friend. I walked the street, 9th Street, and there was a homeless. And when you have lived in New York for 8 years, you're used to homeless, unfortunately. So I just walked by. And 10 yards later, I stopped because I thought, what would a Burmese do if he saw a homeless on the street? Or to phrase the question another way, what would a human being do if he or she sees another helpless human being? And I'm a believer. I think in our nature, it is to help. If there are not many layers of different experiences, whatever, fear, or in our nature is to help another human being. And that's what Tata does. But of course, he gets into a lot of trouble if you pick up a homeless and carry him to a hospital in New York. So that's just one experience. There, I think it's like 70 or 80 pages of the book are set in New York. And and Julia, of course, starts to question herself, her way of living. So that's all big part of the book. And then something terrible happened, as you probably, if you have followed the news a bit, 3 months ago, there was a coup d'etat again. The military took over again, and that is devastating for Burma. I didn't see it coming at all. Some people did, they say, but I didn't. And the country, they turned the clock back. They really, they take the country back into the dark ages. 1,000 people have been killed. Some of my friends are living underground now. A colleague of mine, a Burmese writer, was just murdered last week. People try to flee, to escape to different countries. It's horrific, and there's unfortunately not much we can do. I follow the news. The first 2 months, I spent a lot of time on Facebook, WhatsApp, and so on to stay in touch, to encourage people, to offer help. But at this point, there's really very little we can do. I follow it. I'm afraid they won't let me in for the foreseeable future, but that's a price I have to pay. And so much about the current situation, the why I wrote about Burma, a little bit about my books, and now I'm happy to take your questions, yours, Rona, or if the audience has any.
Yeah, I invite people to, I could talk to you for days, but I invite people to type in their questions. You can either do it on the sidebar or there's an ask a question part, and we will make sure they get answered or paid attention to. I have a million questions, but I always think it's fascinating as an anthropologist. I love that you juxtapose New York and Burma, and both sides have to come to the other side of the world and see what it feels like to be so foreign, city that never sleeps, the lights never go out. I mean, the things that you just get used to when you live there that you don't strange. And
yeah, it is strange. We take it for granted, but if you see it from different point of view, different eyes, it is just mind-boggling.
And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, people think things are normal, but normal is a relative term, I have to say. But, your character, who really is the 12-year-old boy who's telling this story. I love reading books told from the perspective of a child because it's so untainted by other things and not confused by the rest of the world. And why was that decision so important, and how did that work for you?
Good question. The first 2 books are basically told from Julia's perspective. I mean, Uba, her half-brother, tells her the story of the big love of their father, Tin Win and Mimi. But basically, Julia's traveling and Uba tells her a story. Same in the second book, A Well-Tempered Heart. Julia again visits Burma because she is in a personal crisis. She is rich, she is successful, but she is searching for meaning in life, doesn't have kids or a husband. So she goes back to Burma. And again, this time, Uba tells her the story of Tata. So I wanted to stay within this structure. I wanted Uba to tell the story of Julia and Tata, of their love and what happened to them. But of course, he can't tell it to Julia because she's part of that story. So I had to figure out whom could he tell Julia and Tata's story to. And then I came up with Kobobo and their relationship. And their relationship was very much inspired by things I saw in Burma. For instance, I have a friend, she lives with her grandmother. And when I visited her, very often they were sitting together, grandchild and grandmother. My friend was 18 or 19 at that time. And one day I remember I came into the courtyard and she was washing her grandma's hair. The grandma had long gray hair and she did it with such kindness and tenderness. And then the grandma said, her fingernails and toenails were too long. So my friend cut the fingernails and toenails, and grandma said, oh, she has a stomach ache. And then my friend, gave her a massage, and grandma enjoyed that tremendously. And I realized, that's how it is in Burma. You don't have retirement homes. You don't have people from other countries you can hire to take care of the elderly. Who does it? The family, of course. And who does it in the family? Mostly the young. And you see very often, you see young kids taking care of their grandparents. Totally different. So that was a big inspiration for Kobobo and Uber.
Yeah, they have a wonderful relationship. You don't know really who's taking care of whom, because they both really need each other. And Kobobo is the perfect person because he doesn't know the secret to tell it. So he's not going to slip up and share a secret that he's not supposed to share. So in reading your bio and knowing you a little bit, I know that you always wanted to be a writer. But what was the transition from journalism to novel like? And why did you start with one as opposed to the other?
Yeah, good question. It was very scary because, as you said, it had been my dream for many, many years to become a writer. And then at the age of 37, I took 3 sabbatical years and started to write The Art of Hearing Heartbeats. And I remember I was sitting in my small office in the countryside in upstate New York. And I thought, wow, I've been dreaming about this for almost 30 years. And now your dream comes true. Fantastic. And I got scared because I thought, having a dream and living a dream is something completely different. What if I don't like it? What if I can't do it? What if I fail? Then I don't even have a dream anymore. And I found that thought very, very sad. So I was scared the first 2 weeks, but then I realized at least that's what I love to do in reality, not just in dreams. And I wrote the book, and it became a success eventually. It took a little while. And I can make a living out of writing books now. But coming back to your question, it was this transition that at first I was scared. The second was, as a correspondent, as a journalist, you really live the high life. You are constantly traveling. You're interviewing people. You have a lot of input and inspiration. You write a story, and next week or 2 or 3 weeks later, Stern at that time was a big magazine. Millions of people read it. So you got a lot of recognition and attention and so on. I was something when I came there. I'm Stern, correspondent of Stern magazine. People, oh, wow, Stern. Not anymore. I was lonely. I was a writer sitting in a small office. And for the next 2 years, nobody except my wife would read what I wrote. And when I started, I didn't know if I would find a publisher. Maybe except my wife and some close relatives, nobody would ever read what I write. So that was a big transition. In terms of writing, it's completely different. I mean, as a journalist, you have to follow the facts and what your research and everything, the quotes, and as a novelist, it's all in here. It's in here and in here in your heart, and you have to write it down. It's a constant struggle, sometimes still. And the 7th novel feels like the first one. A lot of self-doubt. Who is supposed to care about these characters? It's all made up. It's so, oh my, there are so many books. Does the world really need another one? This is all garbage. Now they will figure out I actually can't do it. So it's hard. It's a painful, long, hard process. As a journalist, you go from one story to another. Here you stick with your characters for a year, for 2, for 3. With these characters, they have been with me for 20 years. I started writing The Art of Hearing Heartbeats in 2000. And that's 2021 now. 21 years I've been with Julia, Uber. That's a long time.
So you say now you're at the end of that trilogy. Are you going to miss them? What are you going to do?
Yeah, I thought I will just fall into a terrible, terrible hole, get depressed, get drunk, whatever. But I didn't. It's funny. I think after so many years, I felt I could let go. I thought the ending is kind of a real ending. I won't give it away. But, Kobobo, here's the story of Uba, but then he is going to search for his parents. So we follow Kobobo on his journey to look for his parents. But in the end, I thought I could let go. It's fine. I think the trilogy has found a conclusion. So it was good. And then I told you in our talk before the event that I was already doing research for a story set in Japan, a novel, and then something else came up, so I wrote another novel, and that was kind of a little liberating. If you write the 3rd part of a trilogy, the good thing is a lot of things are already set. Characters are developed. The bad thing is so many things are already set. The characters are developed. So now I had new characters and a lot of freedom. I felt very liberated, and I just wrote it down. It was funny, you know, when I with my Burma books, if I wrote 1 page a day, it was a good day. With the new novel, which will come out in Germany in a few months and hopefully in America next year, I wrote 5 pages, 6 pages, 7 pages a day. Wow. It was amazing. And I listen to different music. Also funny, I always listen to music when I write, because, you know, when you create a fictional world, at least for me, in order to live in that world, I have to leave the reality. So, and I need a drug to help me leave the reality. I tried alcohol. It was a complete failure. Whatever I write under the influence, I have to throw it away next morning. So alcohol didn't work. I tried music. And for me, music is almost like a drug. It helps me to relax the first hour, 2 hours of the day. I just listen to music and I get into a different state. And then I can write. I'm in my fictional world, in a different world, and reality doesn't count. And this is funny because I always listen to classical music, Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart, Chopin, and so on. And here, for whatever reason, because it's a very contemporary story about 2 18-year-olds, the new book, I listen to something different. My 24-year-old Jonathan put together a playlist on Spotify, and it's house music. And it's so funny. I wrote house music. I got really into it. And we have somebody living here with us under my office. And one day she came up to my office and said, you know, this is not your kind of music. No, she's 20, you know. I said, no, it's a new music. It was really fast paced. And I'm very curious what the audience, what the readers will say. If you sense it in the book, the rhythm of the language and the speed of the story, if it feels different written under house music or classical music. So this is a big experiment.
You ought to provide a link for us so we can get into the right music while we're reading it. Maybe it would affect our rhythm of reading it if we were listening to what you're listening to.
That's a good idea. I'll do that on Facebook.
Okay, good. Well, I think a perfect book is, you know, it comes to some resolution, but the next page would just be the next day. So you give us these characters and we get to live with them and think about what the next day would be. And I just so appreciate that journey. I'm looking to see if other people have questions because I don't want to hog it. It would be easy for me to do it. It sounds like the music inspired you to write more pages in a day. So you would say that the tempo of the music kicked up your speed?
Yes, absolutely. So one would say, okay, now always listen to house music. But I have to say, even though I wrote 5-6 pages a day, it took me much longer to edit them. The quality was not as it used to be. When I just write 1 page, I do a lot of editing. And here I just want to tell the story. So in the end, maybe time-wise, it was not much faster, a little bit. But it was liberating. It was a little less painful. It was a little more fun. So I will see what I do with my next book, which kind of music I listen to.
Well, we can't wait. Personally, you know, every time I see that you have a book coming out, I get very excited because I know I'm in for such a treat. And I know that the people who follow you, well, it is. It's a treat. And I know the people who follow you are excited that they're going to get to hear the rest of this story. And some people will find you either again or anew. And I envy them when they walk out of the store hugging on one of your books. So I thank you for everything that you do. And I thank you for your time. And thank you for coming to us from so far away. The one thing about the pandemic is the technology is just incredible. So I really appreciate it, and we wish you all the best. And hopefully next book, you can come back to Florida and visit us again.
I promise. If you invite me, I'll come. I definitely come. I look forward to your store, your team, and our dinner afterwards.
Oh, good.
And a walk on the beach.
Oh, it all sounds perfect. Then we promise you the appropriate amount of culture shock because this is Florida. So. Thank you very much. And, the best to you and your family, and keep writing. That's a selfish request. And we literally hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Rona. Good luck. Stay healthy. Stay safe.
You as well. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.